Okay, hi everybody. Thank you for coming to another meeting of the Lewisberry Area History Lovers Group. And today we have Glen Dunbar, and he is going to tell us about the history of Lewisberry. And then we have some of Robert Griffith's historical items here that we're going to talk about, and you can come up and look at them. On the 23rd, we are going to have the historical downtown Lewisberry walking tour from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. I'm going to send out an email to everybody that's on the email list. If you're not on the email list, let me know before you leave today and we'll get you added to that so you get all of the details about parking and who's going to be conducting the tours. But Glen's going to take it away from here.
Okay, sure. Thank you very much. I did give this presentation here maybe 2 years ago, year and a half. Some of you probably sort of remember that, but you know, things change. Our memories change. And before anybody asks, that picture there is a stock photo. Okay, it's not really here, but there is a structure out Pleasant View Road that looks pretty much like this. It's just kind of sinking into the ground. So I thought it was fair game to use. And my whole premise here is that in Lewisberry things do change, but they change pretty slowly. And there are a lot of things right in this area that go way, way back to the 1800s, if not the 1700s. So we'll start with that. Now, of course, before the white settlers came, there were the Native Americans, and this was near the main drag. Sort of the main drag for the Native Americans down on the Susquehanna, sort of where Goldsboro is right now, just right in there. That was a big Native American encampment for actually thousands of years. They've done excavations there and they've found things that have gone back very, very far. And just for those of you who don't know about it, the Susquehanna River is the third oldest river in the world. Okay? It's older than the Nile. It's older than the Amazon. So when I say there were Native American artifacts found down there that go back thousands of years, I'm meaning that literally, because the Susquehanna River was in existence before the continents divided. It's kind of amazing if you know how the continents pulled away from what's now Europe, all that broke off. So yeah, we live in an area that goes back and back and back, prehistoric times. We get the idea in our head that, well, everything here started when the white settlers arrived, but it didn't. There was a lot going on for a long time, long before we got here. Now, you see this canoe path. So York Haven to Lisburn. Lisburn was on the main drag, and then out toward Carlisle. So that was a main drag for the Native Americans, and that passes near here. So there were actually Native Americans right in this area, if not an encampment, at least doing hunting and things like that. And I do know that they have found a Native American burial site on a little island in what's the river there behind Peddler's Village? Conewago? Is that Conewago? Yeah, on the little island back there, they've actually found a Native American burial site. So they were definitely in our area. The first settlers, when they came here, they called this area Bennett's Run Valley. I would imagine it's because Bennett was one of the earliest settlers, and that's what they called it. Redland Valley was another name. Redland comes from the clay that's in the area. And it was settled in the 1730s by the Welsh and English Quakers, for the most part. Now, there were people here before then, but they didn't really settle the area. They weren't allowed, actually, to be in the area until William Penn had negotiated the treaties for this part of Pennsylvania with the Native Americans. Before the 1730s, there weren't supposed to be white settlers on this side of the Susquehanna. But they came, they trickled in anyway. And we know that because Carlisle was a real fortress on the frontier there. So, the settlers who came here, they were attracted by William Penn's deal. And his deal was to get people to immigrate and settle the land. And the charge was 40 shillings per 100 acres. Now, you know, with inflation and all of that, 40 shillings isn't what it was back then. But it's still, it wasn't a lot of money, okay? It was cheap enough to actually get people to immigrate from these countries to settle over in Penn's Holdings, this part of Pennsylvania. So the settlers did come in droves, and for the most part, the route was to Lancaster. At least the Germans came initially to Lancaster, and then they kind of spread out from here. But a lot of the English and Welsh, they would come directly here. The old names of the original settlers in this area, you still hear a lot of these same names living nearby now. The Bennetts, I know Bennetts that live around here. Halls, Held, Lewis, Rankin. That was the first wave. Then we got the Kleins, a lot of Kleins around. Well, I tell you what, any of you have these kinds of names here or recognize some of these names?
Miller.
Miller, okay, no.
Not my Miller.
No, that wasn't your Miller.
No,
It was a different Miller.
other ones are mine.
Strominger.
Strominger.
All you Millers are related.
Wickershams. There are Wickershams. Yeah. So those families go back all the way. So they got cheap land, 100 acres for 40 shillings. But, you know, life was very, very hard. It's not easy to be a settler. You have to cut down all the trees and you have to plow up the ground. You know, back then, retirement didn't exist. People just worked until they died. And when they got older, they weren't able to work quite as much, but they're just, unless you were really, really wealthy, retirement just was settled here. Retirement wasn't a thing. And childhood. If you were 8 years old, you started working at something or the other. You were certainly working hard by the time you got to be 14. So childhood, this whole business about being a teenager and all that kind of stuff, that was entirely different, unknown kind of experience back then. You know, 16 years old, you're ready to start having babies. That's basically how all that worked out. And certainly by the time you were 16, you were ready to be a full-fledged worker in the community. It's funny how that changed. But prosperity did come to the valley, one way or the other. I think you've seen these sites here. They built substantial structures go way back to then, and the people became pretty prosperous. And if you didn't become prosperous financially with the money part, then these were good Quakers, and you became prosperous because you got into heaven after you died. And this is a shot from the old graveyard. Who can tell me where that is? You've probably seen it yourself. Which cemetery is that? Okay.
Is that not the Lewisberry cemetery?
Yes, Nemeter. Batsdorf is another word for it. It's just right outside of Lewisberry.
Can you talk up a little bit? We're not getting the full presentation back.
You want me to talk louder?
Just a
Or?
little louder for this area right here.
Okay.
Turn your mic up.
Yeah, the mic that I don't have. I'll turn the mic up, okay?
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Steve, you got it now, right?
And turn it up when you're at home.
Put in your hearing aids.
Oh, you have very high ceilings and heart surface and everything.
Yeah. Let me have a little humor, Steve.
Yeah, I understand.
Okay. Now, before there was a borough of Lewisberry, there was a place, okay? It was a gathering spot. There was a store here, and these stores, they were places where the farmers in the area could come in and trade their goods for whatever, you know, the bacon or it looks like whiskey. I don't know if that's whiskey. But at any rate, there were lots of little places like Lewisberry before it was Lewisberry. And some of them had names like Frogtown and Pinetown and Fortney and Nauvoo. You all recognize those, right? See, when you had farmers couldn't travel too far. I mean, my gosh, to go 20 miles with mules and whatnot, that takes at least a day. So, you know, you'd have these little spots, these trading centers, like 12 miles apart, something like that. So you have all these frog towns and tiny hollows and everything else. Now, you've seen this sign. If you've lived in Lewisberry, you've seen this sign. Named for Eli Lewis, founded 1734. And the borough of Lewisberry was not founded in 1734, okay? Eli Lewis wasn't even born in 1734. So I think the people who put this sign up were thinking, well, settlers like the Bennetts, they came to this area in the early 1730s. So 1734 is as good a date to throw out there as anything for when people first came here. But it definitely is not the date for the borough. And Eli Lewis, though, he was the main driver behind all of this. And he was an extraordinary person. He was born in 1750. And while he was in his 20s, he opened a store to trade in this area. Okay, in his 20s. Now, remember I told you that childhood didn't really exist back then. By the time you were 16, you were an adult. Okay, Eli Lewis was in his 20s when he was not only an adult, but a pretty prosperous adult. He was a fast burner. And he did enlist in the colonial army, and he became a major in the York County militia. He did participate in the battles of Brandywine and Germantown. And he was a Quaker. So he did all these wonderful things, but the Quakers had to disavow him. How come?
Because it's military.
Because he was military. Quakers don't believe in fighting. All right, well, that's what happened. He got disavowed temporarily anyway. They allowed him back in afterwards. Now his father, on the other hand, the old man Lewis, he got disavowed by the Quakers for something else. And he never got back in again. Anybody know why? What's something else that Quakers are pretty big on?
No drinking.
Not drinking, yeah. And old man Lewis, he liked to drink a little bit. So he got kicked out of the Quakers. And I don't believe he ever got back in again. So, following the Revolutionary War, Eli Lewis's fortune grew, and by 1783, he was in his 30s then, he owned 850 acres of land, and 6 houses, and a store, and it's all right around here, and it was the center of commerce for the Redland Valley. And he was also a writer, and he and a fellow named Prang, which I don't know anything about, and I don't think anybody knows anything about, but he and Prang were the publishers of the first newspaper in Harrisburg. And that was called the Harrisburg Monitor and the Weekly Advertiser. So he was really a very exceptional kind of guy. So in 1798, Eli Lewis got a surveyor. He wanted to have a town named after him. And so he got a surveyor, and he laid out 12 acres of land, which is Lewisberry Borough, and he divvied it up into lots, and he owned 6 homes down in there, and the lots were 50 foot wide and 198 feet deep, and they were put up for sale. There were 32 blocks in the original town, and they sold for £6 each. So, you know, 10 bucks each for a lot, thereabouts. 36 bucks, I had it there converted. Okay, so for about 36 bucks, you could buy a lot in old Lewisberry. And these lots are still there. You still see the original lots. There hasn't been a whole lot changed or houses on them. And pretty much Lewisberry Borough is how Eli Lewis imagined it, okay, and drew on his map. There are some changes. Now, there are still 10 lots on the original map that never got sold. Now, one of the things that was a little bit different, Eli Lewis, you know where the library is right now, library in town borough, he envisioned that as being a market, you know, a farmer's market, where the farmers would bring every stuff in, and he laid that out for that purpose. And there was an area next to that he called the Commons. It's still called the Commons, but it's been chopped up a little bit since how he originally envisioned it. But yeah, it started to take hold, but it didn't get incorporated as a borough until 1832, which was after Eli Lewis died. He was already dead. He never saw it incorporated. His son pushed forward with the plans and got a different kind of survey, but his dream eventually was accomplished. And for a while, Lewisberry really was a poppin' place for trade and commerce. These were mostly home industries back then, okay? So if you go down to Dobbin's place down there, and is it on Market Street? I get First and Market confused, but anyway, the old stone house there. Who's was it Phil Dobbins? It wasn't Phil Dobbins. Which of the Dobbins had that?
Well, the one just died.
Yeah, the one that just died. Don Dobbins, yeah. You go down to his place, if you look in the backyard of it, you see a bunch of buildings, okay? So those buildings were actually businesses at the time.
That's front and market.
Yeah. So in some of those buildings back there, I think he made wagon wheels. Wagon wheels used to be a big trade. He had a blacksmith shop back there. There's another blacksmith shop across the street. There were several actually in Lewisberry. Some of the things that Lewisberry was kind of famous for, they were the handcrafted flintlock rifles. Groves was a master maker of those flintlock rifles. And barn burner matches. You know, the kind of matches where it's just a stick and a big glob of sulfur stuff on top. You've probably seen it. You just strike them and they burn. Lewisberry was a major producer of those kinds of matches. And there was a fairly large factory right down now, you know where the sewage plant is? Yeah. So right in there was a big building where they made a lot of those matches. But it burnt down. things, things come and go. Another thing Lewisberry was kind of famous for was coffee grinders. And they made them in people's homes, okay? And you can still find coffee grinders that were made in Lewisberry. I think Bob Griffith has some, right? Yeah, he has some. And clocks, there were clock makers. Again, these were done in people's homes. So if you weren't a farmer, you lived in town, but you were still doing something to make money. So there were several good clock makers here.
Do you know anything about the shirt maker that was across from the antique store?
I don't know anything about him, but I know he was there. There was a shirt maker there, yep. In fact, Bob Griffith's mother worked in that shirt factory. Window sashes. There's a place in Lewisberry that made window sashes that were installed in the White House in Washington. Okay? You know, the old kind of window sashes, they're kind of like metal and wooden windows and all that kind of stuff. They came from Lewisberry. Now, the White House has been renovated since then, so they're not still in the White House, but they used to be. And also here, there was tanneries and a butchery. If you go down next, you know where the Silver Lake Inn is, okay? You're looking at the Silver Lake Inn. Off to the left of it, you see a house back up there. All right, there used to be a tannery back in there. And I'm told, I've never seen it myself, but I'm told that you can still find some of the remnants of where they tanned the hides. And the butcher place, I was told, you know where, is it Allen's? Yeah, Allen's Eatery. Yeah, that used to be a butcher place and a creamery as well back there. So many of the houses, the historic buildings, still survive. You can go down right outside of Lewisberry, you know, where the highway goes through, just across the way. You see this. Who owns that now? Anybody? The big brick place? Not brick, but stone place? I don't know who owns it right now. But anyway, it says built in 1785 and 10 years plus year of the revolution, birth of the country. So it used to be Samuel Klein, I guess. Everybody know where that is? You can see it from the road. Yep.
Are you speaking about this house, or are you speaking about near the Silver Lake Inn?
Well,
Is it the old mill you're talking about?
I'm talking about this one, not these. These are in Front Street.
Right.
Yeah.
The old mill was owned by the Quaker family.
Oh, the Quaker?
Craker.
Quaker,
Sorry.
okay.
Yeah, you're talking about Quaker. And then this other place across from them.
Right.
Across the Silver Lake Road.
Right.
That was just been bought, and the former owners were the reformers. So I'm not exactly sure what this is.
Well, this one is the mill.
The mill, okay.
Okay. Yeah. This one is Dobson's place.
Yes.
And this one is Hector's place, right? It's across the street. but they're right on the front. It's Front Street, right? In Lewisberry, yeah. My point with those pictures is that there's still a lot of the old buildings in Lewisberry that are still here. And if you notice, they all look kind of the same. I mean, they're made out of the same construction material. Okay, that construction material came from just back up Silver Lake Roadway, up that mountain, up by where you live. Mm-hmm. There was a quarry there, and so that quarry supplied a lot of the stones for a lot of the places.
I note that a lot of them are still the brownstone.
Yeah.
But there's a number of them down there have been re-sided. I mean,
oh yeah.
It'd be interesting to see what was underneath the siding to see the type of structure. But on the Hetrick side, there's like 4 or 5 up from the store. There's like 4 or 5 there that have been re-sided. And they of course, you lose the full effect of the building.
You do, and some of those buildings, if you pull off the siding, you're going to find the stone. But others, you're going to pull off the siding, and you're going to find log homes going way back. It's surprising that those log homes, they still are holding up. They're covered up, but they're holding up. Okay, and some things have been repurposed from the way they were before. Okay, this of course is now the library, right? Okay, what did that library used to be? Yeah, it was a school, yeah, it got repurposed, but it's still around. It goes back, it doesn't go back to the 1700s, but it goes back a long way. And I talked about the commons, right there next to the library. All right, the commons used to be a gathering point. That's a picture of a band that used to play summer concerts there on the commons. And right on the commons, there's reports that for the Civil War, the militia that drilled would come and drill right on the commons, set up their tents and things of that nature. So there are other stories about the Underground Railroad. Yes, the Underground Railroad was right in here. There are stories about a house in Lewisberry Borough where that used to keep runaways, and the runaway jumped out of the window when the slave catchers came up. You know, it wasn't legal to let them help them escape. You can see this here. Anybody recognize this building? Because it's still standing down in Lewisberry.
Is that the old fire company?
No, it's by the fire company. It's across the street from the fire company. It used to be a pretty good sized hotel. And it still looks like a hotel. You can.
What's the blue house?
Well, the blue house, that goes way back too. It's now a bed and breakfast.
Near the hotel, they said on our tour.
Yes.
Post offices.
Yeah, several post offices.
2, that was interesting. You had 2 going at the same time, I guess.
Well, the way the post office used to work, it was a political job. So every time administrations changed, you got a new postmaster.
Yeah, but they were in people's homes then.
Oh yeah, they were in people's
You didn't
homes.
have the post office.
Yeah, yeah. Actually, there are 3 post offices that I know about that at one point or another were running on that right in Lewisberry Borough. Okay, so my point is we can see a lot of history in the area. This allegedly is the oldest structure still in use in the entire area. Goes back allegedly to the 1700s. This one's just right outside of Allen's Eatery. You've seen it. I'm sure you've seen it. Yeah. And of course the old church, although this really wasn't the oldest church. It wasn't the first church. It was just one of the oldest churches. And it's still around, and it needs work. But one of the things that's really interesting, see this like gravel parking lot right there? That used to be where Lewisberry jail was. And they had the jail right there, and because they didn't get a lot of business, they also kept the pumper, the fire pumper truck in there. And then when they moved it, when they had a prisoner, they would move the pumper truck out of the jail and stick somebody in there. Okay. So my concluding thought is Lewisberry's like Lake Wobegon. You know, it's a place that time forgot, but decades can't improve it. It goes back. First census for Lewisberry in 1840 showed a population of 220. 2020 census figure 380. So yeah, it's grown over the years, sort of. Yeah, and you find a lot of history there, and I like it with the Methodist Church and listening to the church bells. You know, I don't think they play every noon anymore, but they used to play every noon. And old timers, they tell me the bells were synced up with the schools, so when they heard the church bells ringing, the kids knew to go home and get their lunch and come back when the bells rang again. So Eli Lewis, he was an exceptional guy. He left progeny that was pretty exceptional. Webster Lewis, it's one of his sons. He was a medical doctor. He practiced here in Lewisberry. But what he got famous for was his research with opium. And you remember, back then, opium, it was, you could buy opium, you know, in the stores. Most people had it in their medicine cabinet. You can still see opium plants growing around Lewisberry. I see them down by Silver Lake. So Dr. Webster and others would grow the poppy plants and make it into opium. And at least Dr. Webster was doing research on the effects of opium, and he got published in a number of pretty prestigious medical journals. Another son was Eli. He was a big banker down in York. Ellis became chief of the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, Attorney General. James, Elizabeth, and Pamela, we don't know much about. They were his daughters. and grandson Samuel was Pennsylvania treasurer, auditor general, and lieutenant governor. So the Lewis of Lewisberry left a very definite mark on all of Pennsylvania and certainly on central Pennsylvania. So my advice is to just look around and see all the history that comes back.
Is there a family plot